Welcome, everyone. We got a little feedback during the last panel that it was hard to hear some of our panelists. Can everybody hear okay? Okay, great. So welcome back. This is our second panel of the day. You can see some familiar faces up here. My name is Christine Heffernan. I'm leading strategic initiatives for SAP's regulated industries. And this panel, what we want to do is focus on the ingredients of a data-driven culture for evidence-based policy and program decisions. Really interesting topic. I think what we'd like to touch on are things like what is a best practice data culture? How do you get there? I think during the first panel we talked about how do you take unstructured data that isn't quite maximized and get it in order so that it could be leveraged as a strategic asset. And I think this panel will be more about once you have that strategic asset, how do you make sure that your organization is ready to consume and optimize that? So we'll talk about advanced analytics for decision making and also employee data literacy, which is a topic that I'm interested in. So I want to introduce our panel. To my right, I have Rajesh Sripada, a familiar face from our first panel. He's the Director of Data Management and Analytics for ROTech. He also is spending a lot of time at the Food and Drug Administration. He aligns with the Center of Excellence model that he instituted there years ago and is helping the FDA meet their mission objectives for integrated data with self-service analytics. So he's got a lot to offer. We also have Dr. Paul Tibbets, who is joining us from the Department of Veteran Affairs as the Executive Director of Office and Technical Integration. Dr. Paul Tibbets has a really unique background. He's been at the VA since 2006, leading enterprise architecture, systems design, and software development. He's worked on EMR integration, supply chain modernization, and financial business transformation. He supported and led the first and second EMR implementation for the military. It's pretty exciting. He's also a doctor of internal medicine, and he's a veteran, active duty for 26 years, so thank you for your service. We also have another familiar face. We have Dr. Carrie Bomarito, who's Director of Data Science for Mercy, which is a health system headquartered in St. Louis. Again, Carrie has a PhD in public health studies and epidemiology and a master's degree in public health. She leads a team of data scientists that translate the most complex business problems in healthcare into advanced solutions with visualization models. Before joining Mercy, Carrie spent some time performing health services research at the Washington University in St. Louis. And last but not least, we have another new addition to our panel. We have Michael Huffman, who is the Vice President of See Beyond Data, an SAP partner. Michael Huffman is a leading government financials expert with over 20 years experience building, growing, managing organizations, programs, and projects for the federal government. And he also spent 17 years implementing different commercial off-the-shelf ERP and financial systems, so unique perspective there. So with this great panel, I think what I'd like to focus on and think about is a quote. So Michael Bloomberg is sort of famous for having a plaque on his desk that reads, "In God we trust, everyone else bring data." And I really like that because I think that leaders need to first set the tone for an organization that data will be embedded into the culture in such a way that employees throughout the organization feel comfortable, feel comfortable using data. So I'd like to start a question for Rajesh. Maybe you can kick us off and tell us a little bit about the FDA. So we know that the FDA has a mandate to modernize. Can you tell us a little bit about change management from your perspective as you're implementing some of their strategic initiatives? What have been the challenges? And then how have some change management practices created some success and some wins.
Sure, and since you mentioned a quote, let me start with a quote. It was interesting, I read it on my way here this morning. It said that we don't listen to understand, we listen to respond. And so I felt that very interesting, because when we are listening to our customer, the federal agencies, and as a consultant from the outside, it's understanding what their requirements are, what their needs are. It is so important in terms of designing the right solutions or the right technology. So talking about modernization at FDA, I know the then CIO had a strategic initiative plan, and now he's with the HHS, but it's a public document, it's available out there, in terms of modernizing the applications at the FDA to meet what's on par with the technology field and introducing that into the agency. And part of that modernization was to take the BI to the next level, wherein that's when we introduced HANA at the back end, which would then move away the offices from using a transactional database to more using a reporting database, which is what HANA is meant for, which would give them the kind of throughput in terms of performance and in terms of reaching out wider into the different multiple data sources. And also, that's at the back end, and even in the front end, we upgraded our complete business objects, business intelligence suite to include, for the longest time, we just had tabular reporting, and now that as needs evolved, the requirements were more into having interactive dashboards. So we got FDA the whole suite that included dashboards, that included exploratory tools. So it's more, the push was more towards not just static reports that they can look at and collaborate, but it's more now to share with their peers more dynamic kind of reporting, which would then, it's more like, it's if you're dealing with, because at the FDA especially, you're dealing with reviewers and medical officers. I mean, they know the data very well. So they don't need an IT guy to sit with them and build a dashboard. All we have to do is give them access to a data model that includes all the data that they would need with the business rules. And they would then go in and basically empowering them to just go in and build their own models at their own pace. So that way, modernization has really kick-started the use of business intelligence at the next level. And the change management, I know, has been a little bit of challenge, getting people off of Excel and using a real analytics tool. Sometimes it's pains to see you built a good analytic model, and then the user would export that into an Excel and start doing his own thing, because that's his go-to tool. And I had one of the gentlemen ask a question in the past: how do you, translate that to a non-technical person? I think for us, the most successful approach has been to take the use case, take the challenge, and rather than demoing a splashy tool, we would go back to our drawing board and build a pilot to really show them, in a sense, how the challenge would translate into the offering that we have in terms of their data. So here is a challenge before, and here's the solution with the technology. And then, because it's their data, they would then see how much time they had to spend before and with the solution. So the adaptability, whether it's technical or non-technical, becomes totally ingrained.
Yep, it's so important, right? Especially as, I was looking up the FDA, and there's always a headline of some recall. I mean, the latest ones over the last week or so have been about their e-cigarette approvals and, trying to go back and catalog that. Right. And like you said on the first panel, it requires so many different departments and so many different data sets that being able to modernize and not just understand your own data, but really see an enterprise view is going to be critical. So I'd like to turn to Dr. Tibbetts. I think, a data culture and what those ingredients might be really starts with a strong foundation. love for you to tell us a little bit about the VA's system of systems approach.
Right. So thank you. The foundation is right. I think that's a great term in the way you couched your question. So to me, I'm not much of a tool person. I look more at I guess as the name of your company actually implies, see beyond the data. I mean, what exactly are we trying to get at here? What's the real question? Rajesh mentioned, he sort of, understand listen to understand. I mean, that kind of inches up in my mind on human-centered design, which to me, I think kind of gets at the so what. I mean, all this data is for what purpose? What set of decisions do we want to make? I mean, whose life do we want to make better by making this set of decisions, et cetera? But then your foundation point, driving all that back down to where does the data come from, and what's the relationship of the data to the workflow? And quite frankly, whether it's an Excel spreadsheet or a Tableau or some new thing that SAP is putting out there, again, I'm not a tool time person. And what we encounter on a day-to-day basis at the VA has almost nothing to do with the tools. It has to do with the quality of the data, the relationship of the data to the workflow. Can we interpret it for the purpose of which the person looking at the chart happens to be trying to use it, and is it suitable for that? So I can't tell you the number of meetings I've been in where there's a bunch of bar charts on the wall, and someone says, okay, well, does that mean that something or other with respect to veterans getting appointments? Well, 2 seconds into the conversation, it's, well, you can't really ask the question that way because the way we appoint patients over here is not the same way we appoint patients over there. So yes, the data format is compatible, and yes, the computer will spit out an answer, but it so happens that the context with which that data was collected makes it impossible to answer the question. So I think you do have to back up to what is the problem set we're trying to get at here, and what human need are we trying to address, and build your whole data strategy around that. I guess the other point I'd mention, if you want to go at it from a patient or a customer perspective, I mentioned human-centered design, would be journey maps. I mean, if you look at a veteran journey from the time the person enters on active duty until the time we bury them, final honors, if you will, what are all the data needs across that life cycle of a veteran and active duty service member? Well, if we understood that, then we'd get the foundations right, and the roll up to certain analytics, to me, would be a whole lot easier, a whole lot more sensible, and but be, I will say, use-driven from the beginning. I've seen any number of data warehouse. We have very large data warehouses, by the way. For our clinical data warehouses, it may still be one of the largest instantiations of Microsoft tools that Microsoft runs anywhere in the world. I mean, it's a lot of data. Well, okay, but and as we move through big data, the question then becomes, well, what decisions are we making to make veteran healthcare better? Well, I'm not sure too often, despite Michael Bloomberg's desk thing there he had, we deal with millions of transactions, a veteran making an appointment, a veteran getting an appointment, referral and authorization. All those millions of transactions are what's going to make a difference in how we serve our customers. And sure, a data overlay of that might be helpful, but diving down into those workflows is where we really improve the well-being of veterans, and then understanding, of course, the cost of all that, and you get into efficiencies and all kinds of other things. But anyway, I'd say that's the foundational element, is understanding how the data gets generated to begin with, and then is that suitable to the downstream purpose to which you want to put that data from an analytic perspective. All right.
It's perfect. I mean, we talked about that very point on some of the first panel, and I swear I didn't plan this, but it's a perfect setup for what I want to ask Carrie, because you talked about understanding the source data, and that sometimes how it's compiled in one place is different than how it's compiled in a different place. And Mercy's done a lot of work around clinical variation and initiatives to reduce that. So, Carrie, I'd love for you to build on what we talked about around Mercy's strong data culture, and tell us about some of the successes that you guys have seen implementing that internally.
Well, and even around data variation, just having that data visible has really helped in that aspect. People can see their data, and they can see, if we're measuring something around nursing labor. We have a measure called FTE leakage, where we can see that a nurse is supposed to work 80 hours a pay period, but we're only scheduling them for 72. And so we created a dashboard for that, and due to that visibility, we found out that a lot of nurse managers weren't inputting the data necessary to properly measure that, and it was making their numbers look poor. And so by having that visible, it really improved their documentation, and that's worked the same in the peri-op space around having cost per case visible and everything around sort of our supply usage. And so we've made sure that even though our EMR is set up the same way, that everyone is using the same definitions, and there's a data governance around that. And so one of the successes that we've had in the peri-op space, I think historically since making that dashboard visible, is we've had about $33 million in supply savings that we've been able to recognize. We've had the same savings in the lab. I think we have a couple $1 million in lab savings. Another success, there's not really a monetary value that we can put to it, but we do a lot of work around drug diversion. And so we have a drug diversion dashboard where certain people within the organization can look at people that we think are possibly at risk for diverting drugs in our healthcare system, employees. And so it allows us to intervene with that employee, get them into counseling, and hopefully, remove that from that situation and help them, and then also protect our patients from not receiving the medication that they should be receiving.
Yep, that's very interesting. I mean, like you said, making those decisions early and making data visible, all of a sudden light bulbs go off, right? Just by making it visible. But we also need to know and trust that the data that we see is accurate. I know you guys do a lot of work with your business users to make sure that they endorse and support the methodology before it gets to visualization.
They're part of the dashboard build and everything that we do around presenting that data. It's driven through the business.
I think that's critical. Michael, I want to pass it to you and take a little bit of a different spin. You have a lot of experience implementing federal financials, and I'd love to hear what you see as the federal government doing in terms of driving a data culture in that space.
So I've seen over the last 19 years a lot of positive movement toward data standardization, especially in financial data. Financial data is easier to standardize, I think, than a lot of the mission data because it's of the way it's structured. So there's been a lot of progress there. Prior to 2000, the Department of Treasury established USSGL, and that's the standard chart of accounts for the federal government. And that has gradually, I think probably now most federal agencies are on a USSGL compliant system. I'm not sure if VA is. Not yet.
CGI and Momentum.
Going that way. But it's made a big difference because now everyone is capturing this financial data using the same accounting structure. As new financial systems get implemented, that's when typically the transition happens. In 2006, there was probably the first transparency bill was signed into law, which created FPDS&G, which is a system where all the contract data for the federal government is supposed to go. I think most federal agencies are sending their data there now. I think there's some that are not quite yet. The Intel's maybe not, but that data is standardized because it all goes into the same system, FPDS&G. The Data Act was passed in 2014, which is now creating a lot of data standardization criteria for, and that reporting has to be done by all the agencies on a regular basis. So that has also helped standardize the way the data has been reporting. So I think it's pretty exciting witnessing that transformation. And it's coming from leadership, it's coming from OMB, it's coming from Treasury, it's coming from the top down. So I think it's really good.
And particularly in this administration, right, with the President's management agenda being so heavily focused on data and transparency, we see the regulation following that, and oftentimes that is what's driving standards within our group of regulated industries. Rajesh, I'd like to come back to you. So the FDA recently partnered with an organization called SIAPS or CIAPS? Yes. I want to say Synapse every time I see it, and I realize there's not an N in there. But the initiative is around real-world evidence, and Carrie mentioned that, and Mercy's doing a lot of work in that space. I don't think anyone believes that clinical trials will go away, and the standardization that exists and the best practice methodology for bringing new drugs and devices to light, but there is a lot of buzz around real-world evidence and its potential. What do you think that says about the FDA's mandate to modernize and their ability to embrace this data-driven culture?
Sure. So if you look at the roadmap, right, the last 13 years, if you really look at how business intelligence has evolved at FDA, up until recently, I would just call it like a step up. People, they were like happy with, we moved from static reports to more dynamic, interactive dashboards. But now the discussion is about text analytics, right? Natural language processing. So to me, that's like, in my opinion, the next level up to get folks at FDA get used to looking at business intelligence, real business intelligence. A couple of examples there. We are working on a pilot for prescription drugs, office that deals with prescription drugs. So this is, and when we talked about text analytics and we were just discussing it, boom, the stakeholder got an idea, so immediately related their challenge or business need with what this technology can do. So we were just in a demo about what text analytics can do, and suddenly they came up and said, hey, look, we've got prescription drugs, companies that submit to FDA for prescription drug approvals, pre-approval, they submit collateral, like marketing collateral, and post-approval, they're out in the market advertising for that drug. So this office is tasked with comparing the text in the collateral before the approval to post-approval. So does that match, or is there a change in a word that could be misrepresenting, the product, whatever, or the meaning or the warning signs? So, imagine manually doing that, right? So this text analytics really gave them the idea to come and do a pilot. So they would give us like about 10,000 of those documents. So we run this text analytics tool and let the tool bring out, the things that don't match, things like that. So that would immediately get the reviewer's attention. So you can imagine the amount of time it would save them by letting the system, the technology do what it's supposed to do.
I think this is fascinating, and we talked a little bit about how new technology makes new business process possible. These applications for new drugs and devices are sometimes 10,000 pages, right? So when we talk about manual effort to comb through those documents and try to link pre-market data to post-market data, it's no small feat. So really exciting that text analytics is going to be able to automate some of that, and maybe even in some cases catch things that reviewers may not.
Absolutely. And again, it's about public health and safety, so the more cases, the more reviews they're able to do, that much more successful they are in their mission. Absolutely.
Speaking of these advanced technologies like natural language processing, predictive, and text analytics, Dr. Tibbetts, can you tell us about how the VA views these technologies and cloud as well, and some of the initiatives that they're experimenting with?
Well, so let me, thank you. So let me try to go from the kind of basic to the stratospheric here. So at a basic level, things like saving money by moving to the cloud, we're extremely interested in that. We have a lot of activity in that regard where there's not a lot of judgment necessary. The economics, if you will, the business case is easy. We have the environment set up in Azure and AWS. If we can, our policy, by the way, is cloud first, so if we can, we actually start new programs in the cloud. That's a whole lot easier than migration. That is true for financial management business transformation, CGI. We started out in the CGI cloud. By cloud, by the way, I mean commercial cloud, Azure, AWS, not on premises. So that started in the cloud. Our electronic health record modernization is with the Cerner product. That started in the cloud. It's in the Cerner cloud, if you will. We are migrating Vista. We have 130 instances of Vista. We've now successfully migrated our first to our VA enterprise cloud environment. And we're proceeding down that pathway of assessing our 300 or so, well, there's about 300 or so applications that we'd like to have in the cloud by 2025. That is a migration. So we have to assess the application, its tolerance for latency, containerization, blah, 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 all that stuff, consider remediation of those things, why, hence, much better to start in the cloud if we can, and that's certainly our preference. If you start moving up from that, though, and you start getting into other technologies, let's say, that we're looking at, certainly middleware is important to us. We spend a lot of time on trying to minimize point-to-point connections and using middleware and whatnot. I can skip over that. Application renovation to us really is a technical buzzword for business process reengineering by another name. So we're not going to go re-engineer any applications without a whole bunch of BPR on the part of the customer. So that's to unilaterally do that in IT, at least from our perspective, it would be ludicrous. So anyway, but then I want to go up to data and the other stuff. You talk about AI and machine learning, that kind of stuff. So first of all, to me, today, almost the application of any rule to data, someone calls it AI. Well, we used to apply rules to data a long time ago. I mean, we're doing drug-drug interaction checking for a long time before anyone ever heard of the term AI, right? So next, and it works, you know, there's a certain amount of validity behind those algorithms that people can understand for what I would have heard termed decisions that matter. You know, it's not your shopping cart on Amazon where you buy a sleeping bag one day and it suggests to you Coleman Lanterns the next day. I mean, who cares if it's the wrong thing? It doesn't matter. Coleman tennis shoes, who cares, right? But where you're starting now, we're starting to get into differential diagnosis or therapy optimization of stuff. Well, the validation of these algorithms now means something. And I personally find the externalization of those processes difficult. I don't see that it's an industry-wide culture yet. Some companies advertise their ability to externalize how the machine came to a conclusion. Some companies skip right over that and don't. If you look at from a machine learning perspective, all of the statistical methods that the computer can choose to apply to a problem, and in whatever order the computer chooses to apply that, Bayesian techniques versus stepwise logistic regression or something else, whatever it happens to be, I've already, in what I just said, probably left 99.9% of physicians in the dust, and on any one of them. And if I put them all together and say, by the way, the machine's going to pick which 3 of these algorithms to use on your particular question, they're going to, I mean, there's no hope of the medical community understanding that, as far as I can tell. Well, until industry can externalize all that stuff so we can go through some sort of validation of these machine learning approaches, NLP included, by the way. I mean, I've seen, for example, some very nice demonstrations of sentiment analysis in the literature, right? And this sentiment analysis can read thousands of articles in a matter of minutes and come up with, you know, the Democrats or the Republicans winning today, and all these percentages go up and down. Well, it's all very nifty to look at, but you sit back and say, well, how do I know that's right? I mean, it could be totally wrong. I mean, and of course, those decisions matter to somebody, but that's not quite life and death. But when you're starting, and I would posit to you all some of the difficulty here, if you look at the application of these higher advanced decision techniques in healthcare, I have yet to find anybody that's made any serious inroads from an IT perspective and AI and all that into differential diagnosis. It looks to me like industry's scared of it. I can't find anybody. So the best I can find is, well, what about applying AI to recognizing diabetic retinopathy? Well, okay, but first of all, you know the patient's got diabetes, you're looking at the retina, and now you're looking for fluffs in the retina to see if they've got retinopathy. Well, great. And as a training wheels for this AI bicycle, that might be fine, but that's not going to help the run-of-the-mill doctor in office who's facing some, you know, unknown crowd of patients there with God only knows what characteristics they're bringing into the waiting room. So I think AI and ML for decisions that matter, I think it's a way off. in the future. And until industry becomes more mature about being able to externalize what the steps are so that it's subject to validation by experts, I don't think we're going to get there with it until industry turns that corner.
Yeah, I think it's a really good point. I mean, just like the FDA, I don't think anyone's presupposing that clinical trials are ever going to go away, but there's this potential that people feel and they want to explore, and I think you're tapping into that too. I don't think the rigor of our research distribution methodologies today is going to go away, but people are getting excited about the new technologies that can maybe point to interesting other places to dig.
Well, you're making an interesting point, because when you say you don't think the rigor is going to go away, I'm fearful that the rigor is going away because people start talking about AI like it's the second coming of something or other, and all the concern about sensitivity and specificity that any pathologist would go through for a new test. Yeah. They seem to forget it and say, no, we'll just stick that in the computer and run some AI algorithms on it and get an answer. I said, and the predictive value of that is what exactly?
Right.
I mean,
right. Oh, you're right.
So I'm actually scared that the rigor is slipping away from us.
Well, interesting. So I think when we think about ingredients for a data-driven culture, Rajesh and others have shared, the importance of infrastructure and leadership decisions, and we talked about some of these advanced technologies that might play a part. Carrie, I'd like to turn to you and take a little bit of a different perspective on the people. So Forbes came out with a statement earlier this year that said data science is the next white-hot career. So can you give your perspective on the teams that you hire and the teams that you source candidates from about, is data science this wild, wild west of capabilities, and is the segment trending towards standardization for capabilities and training that are required for real data science?
There's no standardization. I guess coming from the background that I came from, have sort of my own idea, at least at Mercy and within healthcare, sort of what defines a data scientist within my team. I think it's very important to not focus on, someone who's been taught or knows the latest and greatest sort of black box machine learning technique. I'm more interested in making sure that the people that I hire understand healthcare data, know what is necessary within that data to analyze an outcome and look for an outcome. So, basically most of my team are trained in epidemiology and outcomes research. So I think, if you want to apply an analytic method to your data set or to solve a problem, but you don't know what data you need, you don't know what things need to be considered, what sort of things, need to be able to be looked at to measure that outcome, you're going to, miss your mark and not really get to where you need to be. And so, with predictive analytics and machine learning, especially, in healthcare, I think, what we're trying to do is sort of supplement what a physician can see or what our operational leaders can see to help them make a decision. But as of right now, we're not really trying to replace, their decision-making capability.
I think that makes sense. So another ingredient, and I'd like to pass this one to Michael, is leadership plays a really important role in driving a culture that embraces data. And I think one of the ways they do that is by using data themselves and asking their employees and stakeholders within the organization to embrace data. So can you tell us a little bit about, See Beyond Data's experience with leaders who are really embedding data into their culture, their organization?
Yes, what I've seen is organizations that have a chief data officer or a position like that has a lot more success with standardizing data and creating that culture of the importance of the data. When you guys are talking about, and Mr. Tibbetts, Dr. Tibbetts, you were talking about the difficulty in standardizing data, having someone focused on that and a program of standardizing data is, I think, is really important. On the finance side, or the financial side, where I spend a lot of my time, I think that the CFO can also have a huge influence on that as well. I've seen that with the way the data is structured and being able to kind of look beyond, for example, contract burn, and looking to see when is a contract going to run out of money, or are you spending what you need to spend in order to complete this program. Doing a predictive analytic on that is very helpful. I think a lot of what I've seen on the CFO side is a very transactional kind of focus, right? Descriptive analytics rather than predictive, and getting down to that prescriptive and predictive. But I see it going that way. I see a lot of interest in that. And so I think the opportunity is there. And I think especially if the data is standardized, it makes it a lot easier to do that.
That's perfect. Thank you. So we're coming up on panel time, and instead of a speed round, I'd like to open it up to the audience to ask if anyone has any questions for our panelists that have been with us on both panels this morning, or for our new panels.
Is this on?
Yeah, we can hear you.
I'm especially interested in the comments from Dr. Tibbetts because I'm familiar with the VA and the VA's data. But my question is more generic, but it speaks to what he was saying. I'm just going to put it in broader terms. The problem with pulling together data from a lot of disparate sources is the data is not uniform and cannot be standardized. You don't know what the data source really is. Was it self-reported? Was it collected in some way? How was it collected? For example, in my area, we do a lot of survey data, just for an example. Well, that's all over the friggin' map. You have self-reported, you have mail-in, you have telephone, you have in-person, you have examination, you have records from health providers, on and on and on and on. You put all of that together, you can't standardize it. You try to analyze that as a group, and you've got garbage. And it's one of those garbage in, garbage out type of analyses. Sure, you can come out with a number, but it's worthless, and you're going to make policy decisions on a worthless number. So I want to point out that for certain fields at least, until some way, perhaps in the future, comes up to standardize it, it's a big mistake to put those databases together. You might do individual analyses and see if in some way the results converge in some fashion, but you can't put it together. However, for the other folks on the panel, does it have to be entirely a question? Because I'm sort of commenting, and I'm hoping maybe they'll comment back. In areas of commerce or in other areas of research where the data is entirely quantifiable and is not intangible, like some of the other things in health or healthcare, perhaps that's a really good place to pull things together with big databases, because you can quantify it and you can standardize the quantification process so that then it becomes more reasonable to say, oh, whether it's supply chain, whether it's manufacturing, whether it's finances, whether it's sales to consumers, those can be quantified, and they can be quantified similarly. And that's where I see maybe a real help with AI.
I think
And
that's
then my last comment, and I'll quit, is that this whole morning, and this is a generic comment, but this whole morning has been very interesting, but we're all still inside the box. I don't see out-of-box future type of prescriptive predictive analyses. What I see is a lot of linearity, and I don't see real examples of out-of-box thinking, chaos theory type thinking. I see linear thinking, and I just wanted to comment on that. Thanks.
Thank you for your comments. I think, Dr. Tibbetts, I'm going to give this one to you. I hear sort of three questions there. One around where do we look for standards for this kind of rogue data that she's describing? Two, can we go to retail and private sector industries for best practices? And three, how do we get out of the box?
Well, all great questions, and I guess to a certain extent I would say I either agree or share your thinking or thoughts in all three of those areas. So with respect to supply chain, I guess let me start off with supply chain and logistics. Remind me about the other two in a second, but supply chain and logistics, yeah, I've been at IT for a long time, right? I started this in 1982, so been doing this long, and forever since then. The logisticians were at the forefront of incorporating the business of supply with information technology. So absolutely right. And finding the efficiencies there and managing supply chains, they've always been ahead of all the other professional areas which I had to deal with from an IT perspective. And I would assume that would continue to be true, I think, as you're alluding to, because they're building on a very strong foundation there. In my experience, the logisticians in the information technology community aren't two communities. They view themselves as one community, and hence all the good stuff happens. Also, from a benefits perspective, dealing with the pricing of a lot of commodities, it's very easy to capture the savings, real savings, but because you can just go buy a cheaper commodity. You don't have to go fire anybody. But once you have to fire somebody to achieve savings, it gets to the point frequently we might as well not have done the analysis because we're not going to fire anybody. So logisticians have that benefit as well. Out of the box was one. What was the first one?
Looking to private sector, retail, commercial industries.
Well, so sure. I mean, well, that's sort of the logistics thing. I'd come back to that. But yes, I think there are a lot of lessons learned there. But the other communities are struggling to learn those lessons. I mean, I've said what I've said many times to many different communities in healthcare or others, and they just can't quite bring themselves to mimic what the logisticians have managed to accomplish. With respect to out-of-the-box thinking and innovation, it's a very great question, and I don't have a corner on the market or anything to do with how to be innovative, but if I had to say two things, I'd repeat what I said before. If you're struggling for ideas, gravitate back to human-centered design and journey maps and figure out what it actually takes to fix somebody's problem and drive your innovative thinking from that, and not start off with tools. And quite frankly, data standardization, I'm not sure I know what data standardization is any longer. I used to think I knew, but you field length, I mean, alphanumeric, blah, 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 what is it? The computer spits out an answer. Well, so let me give you this example, though, about workflow. So in one of our facilities, it turns out, when they make an appointment with the veteran in the community care, they also make an appointment at the same time for the veteran in the hospital. In case the veteran doesn't get to the appointment outside, they have this appointment waiting for them, whereas another hospital doesn't do it that way, they just make one. Well, there's no way you can put that data together and make any sense out of it with respect to demand management. It is not possible, even though the field length is exactly the same and the thing will compute. It's nonsense. So I would say innovation. I'd say let's go back to the ranch and think about human-centered design, get customers in the room and figure out what they really need, and start using those techniques and journey maps to figure out across this journey what are the data requirements to service whatever that customer is.
Thank you, Dr. Tibbetts. Unfortunately, we don't have more time for questions in this segment, but I encourage all of you to find these panelists after, during a networking break or during lunch, and ask them your specific questions, because they have a lot more to share than we were able to cover in these two panels. So again, a round of applause for our panelists. Thank you, guys.